So welcome everyone. I hope you can see my shared screen. If you want to see a bigger view of it, just double click on it. I want to quickly introduce you to what we're going to do together in the next hour. And so at the beginning of this year, we let out a call for research ideas and long abstracts. We received 39 submissions, which is slightly higher than in-person event. And majority of submissions were from early career scholars, which is really, really exciting. They were mostly from PhD students and assistant professors, which I think is just such a right space for us to develop ideas and help early career scholars sort of move ahead in their journey. We got submissions from about 16 countries, as you can see, which is amazing. 13, most of the submissions came from the US, but then we had sprinkling all around, and hopefully next year when we're together, this map will look even greener and we'll have submissions from all over. And I'm so excited that technology allows us to do that and be so inclusive. Just in terms of setting up what people were submitting. As you can see on the chart on the left-hand side, majority of the submissions were from management areas, so OB, OT strategy, more than 2/3, and then the rest formed smaller slices like marketing, accounting, information systems, and so on. If you see on the right-hand side, you will see that qualitative papers formed a little more than 1/3 of the submissions, and then quantitative and conceptual papers sort of almost split evenly, trailing very close behind. So just to give you a sense of what kind of new research is sort of coming forward. So right now, we're going to do a paper presentation, but I want to give you a quick overview of what the roundtables we're going to do at 2:50 p.m. because those roundtables are also part of this entire corpus of research submissions that we received. So there'll be 8 roundtables. There'll be 3 to 4 papers each, and these papers are available in a public access Google folder that Summer has shared the link a couple of times, and I'm going to request her again to share it one more time. Even if you haven't read any of those papers or it is not one of your papers, I welcome you to join. You can follow along, share insights, get inspired. So that's coming later in the afternoon, but these roundtables were formed from the 39 submissions we received. So I thought that I'll give you a quick sneak peek to it. What we're going to do right now, in the time we have the next hour or so, we chose 4 papers that were the most developed in their journey toward a full paper. So we're calling these showcase paper presentations. Interestingly, 2 are quantitative and 2 are qualitative. So kind of giving you a sense of what high quality quantitative and qualitative research looks like. I'll give each presenter about 8 to 10 minutes. Given that I've taken some time, maybe stick to 8 minutes. I will put in the chat when your 8 minutes are up. And then hopefully we'll have 20 minutes for audience Q&A at the end. And this is where sort of you can really help these authors develop their ideas. So be generous in putting resources, feedback, other things under the chat functions and stage. Also put your questions, and if there are questions at the end, I'll bring them to the presenter. So we have 4 papers, like I said. James Bort, who's at University of Missouri, Columbia, will go first. Then Eugenia with her co-author Kelsey will go next. Eugenia is from Tilburg. Sukhbir will go after that. She's from University of South Australia. And Youthika will go at the end. She's from University of North Carolina. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen and give James a chance to share his.
Bear with me one second while I figure this platform out.
So James, you should see like a button that looks like a computer screen, which is at the bottom. And then you have to choose application window and choose your slide deck. James, you may be muted. Could you unmute yourself?
How about now?
Yes, that's perfect.
Perfect. All right, sorry about that. So this paper is relatively new, been under development for a little while. It's with my co-authors, Jeff Gish from University of Central Florida, and Johan Wicklund, my advisor at Syracuse University, where I just finished my PhD. So my interest in this paper kind of comes from the Kickstarter case. My background is in software engineering, and the issue with Kickstarter was there was a unionization effort. I think they ended up passing this union effort. And Kickstarter, as we know, it was B Lab certified. I don't know if it still is, but they're chartered as a B corporation in the state that they're from. And so I thought it was interesting that software engineering in general is a grueling profession, but that Kickstarter employees felt the need to unionize, even though Kickstarter was a B corporation. So that sort of got me interested in this concept of what is it like to work for a B corporation? Is it different? How different is it? And do employees judge sort of the pro-social nature of the firms more harshly, and how it impacts them directly? So to dig a little deeper into the motivation of the paper, my dissertation really focused on the well-being and job satisfaction being a component of well-being of employees in the new venture context. It comes with all these challenges and uncertainty, and employees wrestling with sort of some of that opportunity identification as well. And how does the organization context influence employee job satisfaction? A lot of the research in job satisfaction talks about more of the proximal aspects of the job, and that is like, what is the job like, the tasks. And so what I tried to look at is what's the organizational context like, and how does that influence job satisfaction? And in particular, what happens is the context changes over time. And B Corps, I think, are fascinating in this way, especially newer B Corps, as they're wrestling with this growth and maintaining their mission simultaneously, which is it's a pretty daunting challenge. And this is a conceptual model that we're currently working with. And so we have revenue growth influencing the impact investment. And then we kind of wonder, we expect both to grow, but does one grow more? We kind of split it between external and internal. And I'm really looking forward to feedback on how we're using these measures. They're still new to me. I'm still learning a lot about it. And then the pro-social perceptions that the employees have. And essentially, we believe that will mediate the relationship between the impact, the mission of the firm, and job satisfaction. And so this growth challenge, a couple of people have looked at it. These are exploratory studies, but there seems to be at least a short-term growth impairment, and probably due to the investment in the certification process. So a startup that isn't worried about any sort of B Corp maintenance can grow however they want, but to maintain your certification, you have to live up to these standards, right? And so it might divert some of that growth that you could invest into hiring new employees or product development to maintain your certification process. And so Parker and colleagues were the first to discover this interesting relationship. They directly asked B Corps. And then a study that just came out recently, again, this is the Academy of Management Discovery's exploratory study, looked at the relationship between entrepreneurial orientation in B Corps, and found an entrepreneurial orientation is the firm's autonomy, risk-taking, and innovative activity. And they found that B Corps in general have a lower level of entrepreneurial orientation, but the more motivated they are by their pro-social mission, the higher it leads to an increase in entrepreneurial orientation. And a lot of the literature in entrepreneurial orientation suggests that it's associated with firm growth as well. So it's an interesting conundrum of balancing these sort of growth and pro-social mission. And so we asked, how does growth lead to increases in pro-social endeavors, as opposed to just growth in the business itself? And is it balanced between internal and external objectives, meaning governance and employees versus community, and those kinds of things? And so our first hypothesis would say that we would expect firm growth to increase pro-social impact. It's core to the firm. And then we offer these competing hypotheses, or not necessarily competing, but that increased pro-social impact, that is, when we see an increase in pro-social impact, will it focus on external or internal stakeholders? And then there's an interesting issue with job satisfaction. So the B Corp is an important designation, it's an important way to be distinct from other corporations. And so it's likely that employees would want to work for B Corp specifically for that mission. And so fulfilling that mission would be an important part of their overall job satisfaction. But employees are sensitive to incongruences. There's a study by Chauhan Edmondson that looked at leaders who propose values, but then don't necessarily act on them or fail in some way. And so there's this expectation of fairness, and I think this balance will be most prevalent in the case where if you're investing too much externally and not enough internally. So there's this sort of a balance issue. In this organization stakeholder theory, this is sort of the foundational theory of the way we're sort of framing this study, highlights that there's a conflict when employees sense a mismatch. And so even though the organizations aim to do the right thing, employees don't necessarily perceive it as so, and especially as the organization is changing and growing. Like if they think, oh, well, they're investing all this money in community, but nothing into us, we start to see some tension, or vice versa. And so and we state that internal investments will have a positive relationship where externals will have a negative influence on job satisfaction. And then these investments will influence sort of their perception, which we argue is a mediated relationship. So that sort of explains that relationship. And so to get at this, we looked at B Lab certified firms. This has been referenced in the panel. Data World, it's a great file, the B Corp impact. And then there's this database called Privco that looks at firms that aren't publicly traded, and they specialize in high potential private firms. So we did a bunch of matching and data wrangling.
James, this is Karima. You have 2 minutes.
Okay. And so then we match this against the website Glassdoor, which employees go and rate their experiences. They can leave qualitative feedback and quantitative feedback, and we like that. It's a sort of unobtrusive, tons of data online. I use a web scraping technique to collect that data, and we look at job satisfaction. We took great lengths to try to validate that measure, including replicating it with actual firms. And this is an example of what that looks like in terms of the job satisfaction score, the work-life, culture, career, compensation and benefits, senior management, and then pro-social perception. So we use a dictionary text analysis approach. This is previously validated in the literature. A study they used it, I think, for congressional speeches. And then we balance it. So in Glassdoor, we see both pros and cons. So things that they liked about it and things that they didn't. And so we subtract those scores to get sort of a balance. And here's an example of some of the things that they'll say. These are from actual B Corps. Dog-friendly environment, awesome benefits, everybody has a common goal. So we can see kind of the positive attributes, and then we can see negative attributes as well from B Corp, where they're complaining about management and it's not necessarily fair with employee ownership, political atmosphere. And then our independent variables. So we're interested in growth rates and sort of how that impacts this investment. The change in impact score, which is one, again, that I'm interested in feedback on, particularly because the nature of the score changes through certification cycles, which we control for, but I don't know if that's good enough. And then we split it between external and internal investments.
Hi, James. You're at 10 minutes. If you could just finish.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm out of time here. So I'm just going to wrap by saying here's some of the next steps that we're looking at. Matching B Corps to firms, lab-based studies to test this incongruent stuff, and topic modeling and machine learning to dig further into that text. The computer-aided content analysis method has some important limitations. That's it.
All right. Thank you so much. And sorry to, sort of make you rush there at the end, but I just remind everyone that James' slides as well as papers are available on the Google Drive folder. So please feel free. So James, if you could leave us for some time and give the stage to Eugenia and Chelsea, and so that they can share their screen. And Eugenia and Chelsea, you have about 8 to 10 minutes.
Yeah, I'll exit and recombine.
Well, that's okay. I can share my screen now. Can you see my screen now?
No, we cannot see your screen, Eugenia. Also, you're in 2 videos. You have 2 videos on, so that might be the problem. So maybe there are 2 browsers on.
Let me leave and come back.
Okay, sounds good. Kelsey, maybe you can start us off in the meantime.
Sure. Okay. Let me just figure out how to screen share here. Okay.
There, we see it.
Great. Oh, sorry. I'm not sure how to do the presenter view without, well, I can still see the screen, but anyways. Hi, I'm Kelsey. I'm from University of Manitoba. If someone can say something when Eugenia comes back in, I can't see her window anymore. But our project, which we're working on with another co-author from Tilburg, is trying to look at the different supply chain mechanisms that are associated with different types of social impact. Eugenia, do you want to take over now that you're back in?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. But I think you can still keep sharing the screen because it doesn't work here. Okay, so thank you so much. Good evening, actually, everyone. It's evening here in the Netherlands. So I'm very happy to share some findings, some insights from our joint project with Kelsey and another co-author here at Tilburg. And the idea of this project was to get a more nuanced view of the supply chains and operations of B Corps. So we thought that there is a lot of research on B Corps regarding their performance, identity formation, gender issues, stakeholder engagement, and so on and so forth. And there is nothing really to tell us more, okay, how do they design their supply chains? And that is very important because we need to know how to design supply chains to create more impact. That is actually very important in growing research stream in supply chain management. But so far, most of the research in supply chain management is really focused on traditional cost minimization issues, and it's only recently picking up, exploring a few different samples of purpose-driven organizations, social enterprises, social businesses, and so on. So basically, the goal of this paper, of this study, which is ongoing, is to explore whether we can link certain supply chain design aspects to specific impact areas. And we leveraged the B Corps data from the data world, specifically the different impact sub-impact scores, the impact sub-scores provided by the B Corps, and use that as clustering, as input variables for our clustering analysis. So we conducted a cluster analysis for 1,588 firms after cleaning and removing missing data and so on. And we followed the standard procedure for conducting cluster analysis from the literature. So basically, standard procedure for identifying the number of clusters, then exploring internal validity, internal consistency, and external validity. Based on all the analysis that we did to check the external validity of our cluster solution, we managed to also get a good feeling of what is inside each cluster, what are the organizations behind each cluster. And then in a next step, we combined it with a more qualitative approach. So we selected 20% of the most representative organization per cluster. So that was the organizations closer to the centroid. And we looked at their websites, we analyzed secondary data, trying to understand who they are, what are they doing, what kind of products and services do they provide, for whom, and how do they design their operations. So briefly to go now into the findings, first we have the 5 cluster solution approach. So there are 5 clearly distinguishable clusters. First one is we call it the community one, because these are B Corps which clearly excel in the impact area community, and the specific mechanism they employ are local community engagement, local job creation, and so on and so forth. So we have there also an example, Wacklandish. It's a B Corp from the USA. The second one was our product-based cluster, the environment one, which I guess was somehow expected. And here we have mostly manufacturers and retailers, and it was nice to see most of them address sustainability in a very holistic manner, which means that they were engaging a lot internally. They were engaging externally with their suppliers, with their customers. So it was a nice combination of activities. And we have there also an example, Organics, a Danish apparel retailer. Kelsey, you want to take over?
Sure. So cluster 3 is the group of organizations that really excel in performance in the workers and customers clusters. And one thing that was really interesting about this cluster compared to all of the others is that all of these organizations as a whole were certified significantly more recently than the organizations in the other cluster. And so these are kind of the newest community of certified B Corps. And a lot of what they do are providing services that can help other organizations improve their impact. So these are they're either services to purpose-driven organizations like social enterprises or other B Corps, or charities, public bodies, or they provide services to conventional organizations. So impact-oriented consulting, sustainability consulting more broadly. Cluster 4 excels in workers and governance, and so this is a really kind of internally oriented impact. And so they do this a lot through the compensation that they provide to their employees, and the benefits, and the fact that their mission is kind of integrated into the organization's founding documents. So it's a little bit harder to change. And now mechanism-wise, cluster 4 is kind of interesting because a lot of these organizations didn't clearly identify what mechanisms they use to create impact. They're kind of just responsible organizations more broadly, where maybe they advertise the fact that they're a B Corp and try and drum up more support for the B Corp movement without indicating any kind of specific practices that they use. Finally, cluster 5 really excels in the customer category. And so they lean really heavily towards financial services. And so they provide a lot of financial services either to marginalized communities or to organizations that serve marginalized communities. So based on all of these clusters, we kind of identified 3 main pathways that organizations use to create impact. So one of them is the target market centered pathway, where impact is created by who the organization serves. So regardless of what they're offering, because they're serving purpose-driven organizations or because they're serving marginalized communities, they create impact that way. The second is the service or product delivery centered pathway. And so that happens when it doesn't really matter what the organization produces. The way that they create impact is by how they deliver that product or service. So whether they use sustainable sourcing, or whether they take some of their revenue and reallocate it to community development activities. The last pathway is the product or service concept-centered pathway. And so in this pathway, it doesn't matter who the customers are, regardless of who's using the service, the product or service itself creates impact. And so this would be cluster 3, like I said, that impact-oriented strategy or communications consulting. So as we continue to develop this project, what we want to really look at is getting down into the specific supply chain mechanisms that these different clusters are using, and really highlighting the role of support supply chains in socially responsible supply chains as a whole, and in social impact creation. So we want to continue to develop a little bit more depth into what these impact pathways look like, and then also dig a little bit more into the service operations literature, because as of right now, most of the work that we've looked at has been really in the product-focused supply chains, and that's really mostly dominant in cluster 2, and there are a lot of services that we need to look at as well, so we might have to kind of broaden what we're doing a little bit more to incorporate that.
Wonderful. Right on time too. Thank you both. There are a few questions for you in the chat function, but hopefully we'll have time at the end to get to them, and feel free to respond in chat. And if you could leave us momentarily, and I'm going to invite Sukhbir to join us. There you are, Sukhbir. So would you share your screen with us now?
I'm doing that now. So you can see my screen, right? Great.
All right, take it away.
And I just needed, just give me 1 second to see. So I guess I'm not seeing my slides, so not sure what's happening right now.
Sukhbir, I could see your slides. So if you do whatever you did at the beginning, I could see your slides.
Okay, bear with me for a second, and I'll.
When you start sharing the screen, choose application window, and then choose your.
So I guess you're just seeing my computer, not the slides. Okay, I'll try one more time. So applications, slides, share. Is this any better?
Let's see. Yes, we do see your slides.
And are there any tips on how do I move this forward, the slides?
I think if you go to slideshow and move them forward, they should move. So if you just go to slideshow. Yeah.
So you can see my slides, and I'll start now, and I'll stick to my 8 minutes.
Yeah.
So our project is about if environmental sustainability and gender diversity. So are there any interactions between the two? So we're interested in, does one good thing lead to another? And our interest in this project was, of course, organizations are increasingly being expected to progress both these issues by employees and by external stakeholders. And we were trying to explore whether there were any interconnections. And our interest in this comes from both a practitioner base and also from our academic backgrounds. So I'm interested in environmental sustainability. My co-author, especially Carol, was interested in gender diversity. And in all our conversations together, we could see them dancing a lot together. And yet there wasn't enough literature available for us to investigate these interlinkages. So on the one hand, clearly there are commonalities between these issues. So both a commitment to gender diversity and environmental issues, it demands a long-term commitment from organizations. Both demand this ability of organizational decision makers to think beyond immediate returns on investment. So for example, we know from our previous research that if organizations invest in flexibility programs, giving their employees flexible work conditions, the benefits of seeing women in management don't happen till at least 10 years later. And similarly with environmental issues, these investments don't necessarily yield quarterly returns. The benefits come much longer. And yet, on the other hand, and despite these strategic overlaps, environmental sustainability and gender diversity, they continue to be siloed within their functional areas. So our research investigates whether does one good thing lead to another, or will moral licensing play in, or I'm doing one good thing, so don't need to focus on the other. And we focused on B Corps. The reason for focusing on B Corps is because both the phenomena that we're interested in are manifest in B Corps. So with their 5 pillars, governance, workers, customers, community, and environment. So B Corps were showing a commitment to both environmental issues and gender diversity. And we were interested in exploring the interlinkages. So these were our methods. We did interview, and we're looking at a single case study in depth. So we did interviews with organizational members, CEO, board members, senior and middle managers. We did focus groups with employees. We had discussions with the industry experts. We did observations, non-participant observations. I'm particularly excited about our analysis of the artifacts. So we looked at posters, stickers, and we've observed this phenomenon that we label as artifact contagion. So if one board member has this B Corp sticker on their laptop, the others wanted it too. And anti-artifacts. So employees start protesting against the distribution of environmentally unsustainable goods. We looked at policies and programs. We looked at websites and social media. And these are our key findings about the interlinkages between environmental sustainability and gender diversity. So we found that there are some immediate linkages, but these are more superficial. And then there are some subsequent linkages that start linking these 2 separate functional areas more closely. And these linkages happen over time across what we label as 3 spaces: formal spaces, by which we mean policies; mental spaces, by which we mean shared identity; and social spaces, by which we mean external reputation. So the immediate links that happen as a result of B Corp certification is that the board and the executive, they show a commitment to both these issues. And sometimes, in this case, in our case study, they had even appointed common executives who looked after both environmental and gender diversity issues. So these linkages were starting to happen in formal spaces. But despite these linkages at the tops, the organization, these functional areas continued to be siloed. And it wasn't really a deep linkage that happened immediately after the certification. More interesting was this unintended dynamics that result from B Corp certification that start linking these issues more deeply across the 3 spaces. And these dynamics that we observed were, in the main, it was this heightened awareness amongst employees who over time became more vocal about calling out on both environmental and gender issues. So I guess our key finding is that if you invest in a B Corp certification, you might be good in environment, you might not be doing so well in gender, or the other way around. But over time, linkages start developing between these issues. And the subsequent links, especially, they're both formal and informal processes that start happening, which start enabling these linkages to be much more closer and much more meaningful. And these subsequent synergistic effects are often an unintended outcome. And this positive shock of certification does unleash this, what we call as the positive coupling dynamics. So this is essentially our model where we are up to now. As I said, we're still doing this research. So any feedback that you have I'll be very grateful for it. So B Corp certification results in mental spaces, shared identity, formal spaces, and social spaces. And environment and gender start becoming linked through immediate linkages, which are more superficial, but over time, more deeper linkages start developing. And these often happen through common champions and a call-out culture. And this is my last slide. This is the title that we're playing with, The Little Engine That Could. So the reference is to this popular North American children's book about environmental sustainability being the little engine, which over time can start pulling along gender diversity. So I'll stop at this point. And
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Later. Thank you.
Thank you. So if you could stop sharing, and I'm going to invite Youthika on the screen.
So I think I've stopped sharing, right?
Yes. And Youthika, if you're around, could you join us now?
Hi.
Perfect. Would you start sharing the screen, Youthika?
Hi, yes, I'm here. Hi, can you
Yes.
see?
Yes. Yeah, if you could start sharing the screen.
Yes. So, okay, application. I can see the application window, but my lot of tabs open on my computer, so I'm not able to see the presentation I have.
Like me to share, Youthika, if you're having trouble finding it?
Just I'll give it one more try. I think the problem is I had too many windows open. Yeah, I think if you can share the screen, I think it'll just make our task easier. Can you share the screen?
1 second.
My computer got stuck.
Youthika a minute to reconnect. She's coming back. Just one more question. And in time, you feel free to input your questions for the presenters who've presented so far. And, they can continue to respond to them in the chat. Also, the poll that Summer mentioned at the beginning of the session, I think that poll will be available in a few minutes because there was some confusion around the link to the poll. So as soon as the fourth presenter ends, we're going to open the poll after that, and you can vote on the best paper out of these 4. So maybe Sukhbir, if you are still around, there are a couple of questions for you as Youthika tries to reconnect. Maybe I can direct a question to you. So if you're around, Sukhbir, can you start your video?
Just bear with me.
There you are. So I think people are really wanting to know what you mean by linkages. So could you say some more, give them some more details around what are linkages and after they happen? So Santiago is asking, after the linkages happen, are new employees socialized into them, or do they become defining factors of the talent that the B Corp attracts. So maybe give a little bit sense on the linkages.
So we were, like, as I said, we were really theoretically and practically interested in exploring these linkages. And this is about a part of our bigger Australian Research Council funded project. What we mean by linkages is that these are two functions in organizations that are really important, and yet they're siloed within. So any interactions between these two functions that actually enable them both to be progressed. And yes, we did find that socialization of new employees is one of the best ways to leverage these linkages. But I see that Youthika's back now. I'll buzz off again.
Okay, but there are a lot of very interesting questions basically, so feel free to respond to them. So welcome back, Youthika. I'm sorry that you're having trouble. So hopefully it will work this time. So I'm going to start the slideshow. Can you see my screen?
Yes. Yes, I can see.
And let me just check advancing it because it didn't work. Is it advancing?
Yes, yes.
Okay. All right, on yours.
Great. Cool, thank you. And I really apologize. My Google Chrome just stopped working for some time. I had to end process and start it again. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
I'll stick to 8 minutes and I'll try to keep it shorter to make up for the time we lost. Okay, so hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining. My name is Youthika and I'm a PhD candidate at the University of North Carolina. My paper is titled Strategic Advantages Through Social Responsiveness, the Case of Certified B Corps. So let me begin by just quickly summarizing what social enterprise is, and I will not go into too much detail because I believe all of you are familiar with what social entrepreneurship is. So basically, I'm studying hybrid organizations that pursue both social and financial missions. And they are called hybrid firms because they combine the efficiency, resources, and profitability of for-profit organizations along with the values and missions of not-for-profit organizations. If you can just go to the next animation, Garima. Yeah. By combining these aspects of two organizational categories that were historically considered to be distinct, social enterprises are in some way blurring the boundaries of firms that were considered to be very distinct from each other. Can you go to the next animation? The next one. So because of this, the category spanning nature of social enterprises, these firms face a lot of challenges, which is in the next slide. So these organizations have been referred to as arenas of contradiction or locus of disorder. That's mainly because their goals are often considered to be conflicting or incompatible. Now, categories is the term that is used to refer to a shared understanding of the market. So basically, internal and external actors channel their perceptions about the firms through these categories. By having dual missions, these organizations span multiple categories. And what are the consequences of this? So literature suggests that when an organization spans multiple categories, it's likely to be ignored or undervalued, and it can receive less legitimacy from external actors. Also, internally, they can face a lot of conflicts, which brings me to the gap in literature that I talk about so the gap in literature about external and internal actors not being able to interpret the category of firms, which brings me to the research question in the next slide. Yeah. So I'm trying to understand whether certification can help an organization to establish its category internally and externally. Specifically, the research question that I am trying to answer is in the next slide. So how does certification play a role in the establishment of a category of firms internally and externally? And how does it help in the reinforcement of dual missions, of social missions and financial missions at different levels within an organization? So these are the research questions that I'm trying to answer through this paper. I've used multi-case study analysis to answer these questions. So I took semi-structured interviews with firm founders and employees. I asked them about their organization, why did they choose to be a B Corp? what were the changes that they underwent when they became B Corp certified. I audio recorded the interviews and I analyzed the data using the qualitative inductive methodology described by Joya, Corley, and Hamilton. So I'll talk about the data for a bit now, which is described in the next slide. So the data comes from all 7 certified B corporations in South Asia, so specifically in India, Bangladesh, and Myanmar. I was able to take interviews from the entire population of certified B Corps in this part of the world, so I did not have to sample the organizations further. All the firms became B Corps between 2015 and 2018, and my respondents shared that B Corp certification was a very significant event during the life of the firms, during their experience, and that's why they were able to recollect all the changes that the organizations went through in the last 2 or 3 years. I collected the data using in-person interviews at each firm. I supplemented it with archival data and field observations until I reached a point of theoretical saturation. So I present my results are in the next slide. So some of the key findings, some of the common themes that emerged about these organizations was that as they became certified, they underwent significant process changes. So for example, some organizations adopted a week of paid volunteering for their employees, some set up an environmental committee, and so on. Further, they also underwent certain changes in terms of their external processes. For example, they changed the way they made their communication to the job seekers. They made sure that the employees were engaged to the rural community and to the local community and so on. So these were the process changes. I also found evidence to some perception changes. So internally, many firm founders and employees described how their perception about the organization changed. One very remarkable perception change was that they felt that financial and social missions are not conflicting, but in fact, they are very complementary or mutually reinforcing. And that's how I found evidence that B Corp certification can help in the reinforcement of dual goals. I also found instances in which interviewees described how their external actors, such as investors, client, and prospective employees, recognize the organization better through the certification. So these were some of the perception changes. The overall data suggested that the B Corp certification strengthened the understanding of the firm's goals, and it also reinforced the perception of complementarity between social missions and financial missions. So these were some of my key findings. In the next slide, I have described the inductive model. So so here's the inductive model. I'll go over it really quickly. You can see I've described organizational characteristics before the organization became a B Corp, when they underwent the changes that they underwent during the B impact assessment and the certification process, and finally, what were the organization's attributes after it became certified. So I found changes at the level of the founder, the organization, and further at the level of the external environment. And I found evidence that B Corp certification actually helps improve the transfer of the mission from the organization's founder to the employees. And it also helped in category diffusion. So an understanding about what the firm is all about towards the clients, the labor market, and towards the investors. So with this paper, we contribute to, the contribution of this paper lies in broadly 2 areas. One is the literature on social enterprises. So I've discovered some factors and mechanisms that can help in category establishment, specifically process changes and perception changes. I found that certification can possibly delay or even prevent the occurrence of conflict between financial missions and social missions. Also, the prior literature suggests that social enterprises or hybrid organizations face a lot of tensions because of the dual missions. I found that maybe this conflict or these tensions are not very relevant in some organizations, specifically B Corp, because it reinforces the notion of complementarity between the goals rather than a conflict. So this paper also adds to the literature on organizational categories by describing the mechanisms by which organization goals can diffuse across different levels within and outside the organization. So these were some of my findings. Thank you for listening, and thank you, Garima, for helping me with the slide sharing. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you, Youthika. Maybe you could stay here. We have just about 5 more minutes, and I will invite others to join, and maybe we can take a question or two. I'm just going to scroll down and see if there's a question for you since you're here. So I think Joe has suggestions for certain papers. You can sort of note from the chat. All right, so looks like we can sort of hand it over to Summer, who's going to introduce our next presenter. I want to thank you and Sukhbir, Eugenia, Kelsey, and James for sticking with us as we figure out this technology, and also just doing a brilliant job of just presenting the crux of your research in time. So thank you to all of you. And Summer,